What's up? You're listening to the Daughter's Diary podcast, and today I'm talking to you about communication. Whew. All right, so we're diving in talking about communication. I just thought it was important to just kind of hit some nuggets on communication because communication is so important in everything, in every relationship. You have to communicate in some form. And so communication has to be done well, which is so interesting because I think it's one thing that most people can agree that they struggle to do, which is communicate. But really, it's maybe not simply communicating, but communicating well. That's the struggle. And so something Brandon and I were talking about the other day, which I shared with him, was, we really have to do a better job of defining communication, especially when it comes to relationships and the dialogue that takes place. Because just because you talked to someone about it doesn't mean that you communicated well about it. And I think a lot of times people argue, or people just kind of introduce an idea or a topic, and they're just kind of like, oh, well, we talked about it, but did we communicate well about it? Because simply bringing it up and maybe simply addressing it is not the same thing as having a meaningful a meaningful type of communication with it. All you did was bring it up and address it. And I would say that that's just not really that healthy or conducive, realistically. Like, communicate well, communicate clearly, and leave space to try to understand. And so one thing we've learned about, especially as we've done with our pre-married life class, and really just outside of that as well, is just active listening. Like, actually listening to people to hear what they are saying, rather than listening to people to either A, respond because you want to, or as soon as they get done, or B, react because they said something that you didn't like. So actively listening to people and then processing what they have said so that you can respond as need be, but not just blotting out what they're saying so that you can just get your turn to speak. Like, that's a step towards healthy communication. Repeating back what you heard, that is a step towards healthy communication. Why? Because what we hear isn't necessarily what someone says. And so we need to repeat it back to make sure that what we heard was what was said. And sometimes that's not the case. And oftentimes Brandon will repeat back to me what I said, and sometimes he will say it to me the way that he heard it. And the way that he says it back to me is like, oh my gosh, is that how you heard what I said? And sometimes he'll say, yeah. And a part of me is kind of wants to get defensive because it's like, I didn't say that way. You just heard it that way, but I didn't say it that way. But that's how he heard it. And so sometimes I'm kind of like, man, I guess in my mind, I'm just like, if that's how you heard what I said, wow. Like, it's no wonder you don't want to respond, because that wasn't a very inviting way to say that. That didn't really leave you any room to feel safe to respond. And so going back to tone is big. How you say something matters just as much as what you say. And the timing that you say things matters just as much as what you say. And all of those things matter for healthy communication, and leaving space for people to process matters. One thing I'm learning as well is just patience in communication. I think that mentally I process pretty fast, and and I'm also pretty thorough in my processing, even though it's pretty quick. And so I can start to get impatient when it seems like people are taking so long to process their thoughts, which is not conducive for healthy communication. And so being patient is a big piece of communicating well. And that's something that I'm having to learn. Probably tone, number one, and making sure I'm patient as people are communicating so that they have space and vulnerability to process and share without feeling like they're being rushed to share. And so that's just a few little tips on communication that I think have been useful to me. I would also say that there's some things that I'm noticing that are lacking in just basic communication skills nowadays, and things that we all can practice and try to just create a habit of doing so that we communicate well with one another. Because communication really is key, and we can understand each other much better when we communicate much better versus just saying, I don't know what they're talking about, oh well, or just reacting to what people say. No, let's actively listen. Let's process. Let's give them time to process. Let's pay attention. Let's repeat back what was said. And let's not mistake simply talking for being healthy communicators, because it's not the same thing. So, how do you communicate? What's your communication style like? And what's something that maybe irks you when you're trying to talk to someone and communicate with them and they're doing this or they're not listening in this way? What's something that stands out to you? Till next time. You've been listening to the Daughter's Diary podcast. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. For more information, you can visit our website at www.achanelmore.com. There, you'll find blogs, a store, more podcasts, and tips. Thank you for your time.